This will be coming from Matthew chapter 19, verses 1 through 12, and also Mark 10, 1 through 12. What's the page in the 357 in the New Textbook? As we come into the lesson this evening, we're looking at a very controversial subject. It was controversial when I came in the church in the early 70s. It was controversial when I began preaching. And early on, it seems like when you ask about, when you were asked, and I was asked, a gospel meeting, and asked what kind of lessons they would like, a lot of times one of the things is, well, we really don't care, just some good Bible lessons, except could you talk about divorce and remarriage? And I find that divorce and remarriage is like politics in America. People have a side, they're entrenched in that side, and while we can debate and we can talk and we can teach and we can look at, not a whole lot of people end up changing their position. They just want people to, again, come over to their side. They want to win them over. And so it is that even in Jesus' day, it was a controversial subject. It is apparent that it was even somewhat controversial in Jesus' day. And the real controversy, I find, really doesn't come from the subject of divorce and remarriage, but it really stems from the lack of honor given to marriage to start with. And that's kind of where Jesus takes the discussion as he is addressed here in these verses. There are lots of opinions when it comes to divorce, and there are a lot of opinions about remarriage. But the subject itself, according to Jesus, is, have you not read, in the beginning, he created them male and female, and said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife, and they two shall become one flesh. And then he says, what God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. If you read that very closely, it basically says that the man and woman will cleave together. And literally, the idea of being cleaved together is that they are bound or bonded together. And the way you kind of look at that is if you've ever seen anybody get super glue on their hands or fingers and close their hands, it's not coming apart. And getting it to come apart, they've figured out a few ways to do that now. But originally, when people got super glue on their fingers and got them all stuck together, when they went to the emergency room, you know what they did to get their fingers apart? They took a scalpel and they cut them apart. After a while, again, in the chemical makeup of the super glue and all, they again developed a few things that solvents that can get that apart now. But the point is that once it's bound together, again, you have to cut it apart. You have to do some serious damage, because when two things are bound together and they become one, it's very difficult to start cutting them apart without doing major damage to both. And this finds itself sometimes in what we know today as Siamese twins. I think we've all seen Siamese twins. There is the process where one embryo starts to divide into two, but it never quite finishes, and so the two are bound together. Now, depending on the case, there has been situations where the Siamese twins have been able to be separated without any major damage to one or the other. And sadly, in times past, doctors have give parents the news that, again, you've had Siamese twins and it's going to be extremely difficult. What our recommendation is that you sacrifice one of them so the other one can have a better hope of life. And so, of course, trying to, in that sense, you are actually ending one to continue on with another. And so the whole point that Jesus gives us is, as we look at this, to keep it in the framework, is marriage was never intended to be separated once it was put together. God did the joining, and man was told not to put asunder, not to separate or divide. And so that has with it its controversies. Where the first divorce took place, we really don't have, that I'm aware of, a record of the first husband and wife. That's one of the things that in the book of Genesis, when we're talking about first things, there doesn't seem to be the first granting of a bill of divorcement, and we don't have that recorded. And that might in and of itself tell us something, that God chose not to even to bring that into a discussion. Even though he chose Cain and Abel, the account of that and many other things, he chose not to give us the first bill of divorcement, so to speak, the first breaking of that covenant of marriage. And so we really, again, we're going to look at these verses, but if we follow the path that Jesus tries to explain here, is that, the problem is we just don't honor marriage and respect it and abide by it as we should. Again, for various reasons. The husband wants to get rid of the wife wants to get rid of the husband for unfaithfulness or otherwise. And so that's man putting asunder the things which God, for whatever reason. And so God expected us to work things out, to guide our families, to keep our families together. That was his original plan. And since we have really messed all of that up, it's hard for us to really appreciate. And I find that in the church over the years, many people have learned to change their view of divorce and remarriage based on family situations with their brothers and sisters, mothers, fathers, sons and daughters, whatever the situation may be. Those who had what I would think a good solid understanding of God's teaching of marriage, their views tend to change. They had an epiphany somewhere along the way. They discovered some new concept that takes them off from what they originally thought. And so we're told here as we read, it came to pass when Jesus had finished these words. That's the words when we're talking about the subject of prayer that we covered in the previous lesson. When he had finished those things, he departed from Galilee, and he was heading toward Judea and the area beyond Jordan. He arose from thence and came unto the borders of Judea and beyond the Jordan. So he left Galilee in the north, came down or around Samaria, whatever the case may be in this particular situation. He came into the realm which we would think of as the southern kingdom or the area of Judah, but he still was on the east side of the Jordan, in the wilderness there, the area of Transjordan as it's thought of. And so there he began teaching, and we're told great multitudes came together unto him, followed him, and as he was wont, he taught them again, as his custom was, as his desire was, that you never pass up an opportunity when you have a multitude of people who have assembled together and they're looking for you. Never miss the point and the opportunity to have something to say to them. And so he was there teaching them. And he also, we're told, healed there. He healed them also as he was teaching. And of course, the news of his showing up in the area of Judea, even if it was on the other side of the Jordan, piqued the interest of the religious leaders that were there at Jerusalem. And the message is sort of, he's back. He's back again. He's on the other side of Jordan. He's came down from Galilee. And so we're told that there came unto him Pharisees and asked him, saying, Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? And then it says, trying him. You want to start an argument? Talk about divorce and remarriage. In the church, that has about the same effect that when we were having Bible studies with people of other religious groups, when we started getting them sort of backed into a corner to where they were going to have to admit that, again, in order to be saved, they needed to believe, repent, confess, be baptized. The pressure was on that this accepting Jesus into your heart and praying the Lord's Prayer wasn't going to work. A lot of times they would know how to create a diversion, and they'd say, you people in the Church of Christ, y'all don't believe in using instruments of music, do you? And so that would pretty much bring the lesson to a screeching halt, because one or two things were going to happen. They kept asking that question, and if we try to talk about their obedience, and so that kind of brings everything to a halt. And so the religious leaders knew that there had been controversy on the subject matter of a man, first of all, putting away his wife. That's the issue of divorce. In the law of Moses, there was stipulations placed there that if a man had taken a wife and he found some uncleanness in her, that he could give her a bill of divorcement and send her out from his house, and she was, after given the bill of divorcement, she was free to be married to another. And of course, she carried the bill of divorcement so that if someone asked, is it lawful for you to be married, she had with her the bill, the writing of divorcement to prove that, she was subject to be remarried. But amongst the Pharisees, there were two different schools of thought. Like everything else, there tends to be a liberal side and a conservative side. I don't think that surprises anybody. Whether we're talking about, again, politics, religion, whatever. And even among the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they had their own differences. But there were two primary schools of the Pharisees. One tended to be much more stricter than the others. And so even among the Pharisees, there was disagreement as to what it meant if he had found some uncleanness in her. And of course, unclean, as it is used in the Old Testament, has to do with some type of spiritual uncleanness, impurity, something which has happened, which is amiss from the way that it should be. Now, it would have been easier if Moses had just said, if he finds that she has committed adultery, he can give her a writing of divorcement to put her away. And that would have been straight and to the point. But that's not the way that Moses worded that, and it's not the way apparently God gave it to Moses to be worded. And so the more strict flavor of the Pharisees said that the uncleanness was sexual impurity, and that in essence she had committed adultery. And so therefore God would allow the divorce. And of course the more liberals say, well, now that's not exactly what it says. It says if it's found some uncleanness in her. And so again, that opens the door to a little bit of everything. If there's some reason that she doesn't please you, if she's not a good housekeeper, if she's not a good cook, if she's not this, if she won't do that, if, on and on and on, then those things could be seen as some uncleanness in the sense that she was not honoring her responsibilities. Brother, and so, yes?
Brother Brian, Matthew 5:31, it has been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a written of divorce. 32, but I say unto you that whosoever shall put away his wife, saying for the cause of fornication, causes her to commit adultery, and whosoever shall marry her, that is divorce, committed adultery. How could, if I get a divorce tonight and she go out here and commit adultery, I'd be held accountable for that? I can't tell her what to do.
Well, if the point is what Jesus is saying there, and what he's going to say here is, if you get a divorce for reasons other than allowed by God, and you put her away, and then she goes out and marries somebody else, you caused her to commit adultery because technically she's not divorced from you, because you had no right to give her that bill. You had no grounds. Just because you want to get rid of her, that's again, adultery, fornication, sexual.
It says, if she commits fornication and I put her away on her divorce on fornication, and she remarries, commits adultery, then it goes over to adultery.
Well, not if you're divorced. I mean, if she did that and you divorced her, then once you're divorced. So you're no longer married, so she can't, if she marries somebody else, she can't commit adultery against you because you're not her husband anymore.
It's not
But if you give her a writing of divorcement for a reason other than adultery, then what you're doing is you're causing her, when she goes out and marries somebody else, you caused her to commit adultery because you didn't honor your responsibility as a husband to her. You don't like the way she folds the sheets, or you don't like the way she irons your underwear. Again, that's not, she puts too much starch in your underwear. That's not a cause for divorce. But if you get all upset about it and put her away, again, she goes away and out of the house, and she finds somebody else down the road. She doesn't have a scriptural divorce. And so if she doesn't have a scriptural divorce, she can't have a scriptural remarriage. And so, of course, Jesus is going to say, well, y'all should have fixed your problems and sorted it all out and acted like you're supposed to.
If she commits fornication, in other words, I just have to stay with her anyhow.
Well, no, if she commits adultery, you have grounds to put her away.
Yeah, but then when she does something, I'm going to be held accused.
No, not once there's a divorce. I mean, if it's a scriptural divorce, once she's gone, she's gone.
So if somebody is divorced, right? If the female remarries, in other words, if they're divorced non-scripturally, let's put it that way, and if the female remarries, has she committed adultery then?
Yeah.
Okay, so
And the husband would also.
what I'm asking you is does that mean you can legally put her away then? Is that what you're saying, in a way?
I'm not saying that, but there's some people who've been ornery enough to do that. I mean, I know she hasn't committed adultery, but I don't want to be with her anymore. And the state says there's such thing as no-fault divorce, so I can go up to the courthouse and get a no-fault divorce, and I can get rid of her, as I see it. And she goes off, and so she marries somebody else on down the road. I stay unmarried. I'm all pure and all, So I stay unmarried, and I just bide my time. And then when she commits adultery, then people think, well, now my ticket's punched because now I have a true reason, and so now I can go and marry some. It's like I've always said, especially, I'll put it this way, in Lincoln County, if there's a law, soon as that law hits the books, I'll guarantee you there's a good dozen or more people trying to figure out how to get around it. And so it's the same way with the law of Moses. It's the same way with the New Testament. No matter how clear you teach something, there's always somebody that comes along and says, well, what if? But what if? What if I do this and they do that? And again, is this, as we read what Jesus says here, is that really, you're missing a point again. Jesus said, but from the beginning, it was not so. Again, putting away your wife except for the cause of fornication, hoping that she'll marry somebody else so that you feel good in your conscience when you go and then marry somebody else. Is that really what God had in mind when he, again, gave us marriage, or when Moses was giving the children, but even for the hardness of their heart? I really don't think that was the reason but as long as there's a law, there's a way of trying to figure out the loophole. And so people spiritually have done that as well as they have politically. You go into any court hearing and you listen to the prosecutor and then you listen to the defense attorney, and you would think that those two people aren't even talking about the same thing. I mean, there's this story and there's that story, and the jury has to sort through all of that. And then, of course, there's the good lawyer that looks and, did you give them their rights? Did you read them their rights? Again, did they tell you they want an attorney? Did you keep asking them questions after they told you that they wanted an attorney? What was the search warrant originally intended for? And was the search warrant, did that include whatever it is that you say that you found? If it's not included in the search warrant, then you can't use that in court. And it just goes on and on. And so I was listening to two people that were in the Senate. I was in a meeting one night. We were having a meeting up at Charleston, had to do with the senior citizens, and we invited the legislatures to come over so that we had a reception for them so that we could discuss issues and all as it pertained to the senior citizens and all. And two of them that were there at a table, they were discussing things, and they were looking at a bill that was up to be voted on. And they were reading the bill, and they were saying, now this says will, but that says shall. And so here we go. What's the meaning of it? I mean, what's the meaning? One thing says shall, and the other says will, and another one says must and might, and you've got all these different words in this bill. And what do we need to change in all these words so that, again, it's a good law? Because with all these different words we've got, shall and will and might and can, and there's going to be a varying interpretation of that. So we have to consistently go through this bill, which has 50 pages, and we've got to look at that law and everything they're doing and see how many times it says shall, and do we want it to say shall, or do we want it to say could, might? I mean, what word are we going to use consistently so that the law can't be twisted? And so, again, lots of things when it comes, but this is the big one because this is one of the big ones because this impacts the family, this impacts the home, and of course between the attorneys it impacts alimony and who gets the house and who gets what and how much of your retirement I get and all of those things. And the courts have tried to deal with it, but we again have a broad spectrum of everything from no fault, just sign the paperwork and it's over. Y'all agree among yourselves as to what you're going to do with your stuff. You sign this piece of paper here, and I don't need to hear anything from you as long as you both say that's what you want and you sign it. No fault says that there's no fault. Don't have to have a reason other than the fact that you just don't want to be married anymore. And then it goes all the way up to some states give an option of a covenant marriage. You can have a legal marriage, or you can enter into a covenant marriage. And that state has a two-tier structure on how, if you then later decide that you're not getting along and you want a divorce, well, on the legal side of it, you can do the no-fault thing and probably walk away. But if you opted for the covenant marriage, that's a whole different thing because it's much stricter. You didn't want to be able to be put in a place where you could easily get away from that. And so now, according to the state law, you have to enter into 12 weeks of counseling, marital counseling. You have to do all these things before you can even apply in reality for a divorce. And then in some of those states, it's probably, again, one of those things you have to prove adultery or some extraordinary reason. And so even states have kind of muddied the water with all this. And so it's difficult. And so they were trying him. They were always looking for a reason to get the people who were following Jesus divided, so that one would say he's a great man, and others say, well, if that's the kind of man he is, I don't want nothing to do with him. See, I like many of you, I didn't watch the debate, but I've listened to people and their various opinions, and just like everything else, some people think that Mr. Trump is a great man, and someone thinks that the vice president's a great woman. And so, they each, again, have their own insights and views. And so the idea of dividing, trying to bring something out, cause people to become upset. And of course, for us, a hot button item has to do with abortion and women's rights and all of that. That's a hot button issue. So you bring that up in the middle of a debate. And so people are going to be all over the place when it comes to that, one end of the spectrum to the other. And so the Pharisees wanted to divide the people. If Jesus says that you can let your wife go for any reason, then the people who follow the more stricter way is going to say, well, he's a liberal. I mean, he is just going way past what Moses said to do. And then if he says, no, it's not, then again, just like they said, well, then why did Moses do this? And so people say, he's argued against Moses. He's against what Moses said. And we've followed Moses for 1,500 years, and now all of a sudden this guy comes along and he says Moses was wrong all along. And if Moses was wrong about that, Moses may be wrong about a lot of other stuff. And so he's saying that Moses can't be trusted. And so here we go. So they knew they could stir up the pot. And he answered unto them, what did Moses command you? And they said, Moses suffered to write a bill of divorcement and to put her away. And he answered and said, have you not read that he who made them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, so that they are no more two, but one. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. And so he says, haven't you read before all of that what God said? And so Jesus starts in the beginning. And so he goes all the way back to the beginning and what marriage was about. And they said unto him, why then did Moses command to give a bill of divorcement and to put her away? I mean, if that's what you're saying from the beginning, God intended for the man and the woman to cleave together and be together from now on, and mankind wasn't supposed to become involved in trying to separate that, then why did Moses give us a commandment that allows us to do that? So they see a little crack in their door, and they think, well, let's push it a little further. He's saying one thing, we're saying another, and so they're trying to get. Jesus said unto them, Moses, for your hardness of heart, wrote you this commandment, and others say, suffered you to put away your wives. But from the beginning it had not been so. But from the beginning of creation, male and female made he them. And so coming out of Egyptian lives, Egyptian bondage, but they'd also lived with the Egyptians and under the laws of the Egyptians, and had probably already been practicing divorce for many different reasons. And Jesus said, for the hardness of your heart, because you can't be trusted to do the right thing. That's really what Jesus is saying. You are people who will twist and turn the scriptures to your own advantage. And after having promised to love and honor and death do us part, all that good stuff, you can't wait to figure out how you can undo what it is that you've done, or you begin to dishonor that.
The people must have was just griping and complaining constantly to Moses, and he just got tired of it.
I mean, he gave them, the idea of if they find some uncleanness. I think one of the, God was a little more lenient in the Old Testament. That's why he uses the word uncleanness. He went beyond just adultery. He could have said adultery, but he didn't say adultery. He said uncleanness. And so they had been in a country that probably did not follow, like many of the Gentiles, very good marital relationships and covenants, and the Egyptians had no doubt been dealing with divorce. Coming out of that environment, coming in to the more strict environment that God was giving them in the Ten Commandments. I mean, he was saying, you'll not lust after your neighbor's wife, thou shalt not commit adultery, those kind of situations. And that was a big change for them, just as it is in our country today.
Deuteronomy 24 and 1, it says, when a man has taken a wife and marries her, and it comes to pass that she finds no favor in his eyes, because he has found some uncleanness in her, then let him write her a bill of divorcement, and give it in her hand, and send her out of his house.
And so she was free to marry another. But the law of Moses also goes on to say that once she's been put away, and once she's went out of the house, and once she has married, if you follow on down through there, once she's married someone else, and if he finds some uncleanness or unfavor in her and gives her right in divorcement, her first husband can't take her back. And so part of that law Moses gave was better, before you do that, you better think it through. I'll give you, God's given you the opportunity of divorce, but you can't ever have her back. So he's trying to make them think, do you really want to do this? If whatever the situation is, circumstance, and again, favor, uncleanness, it's not specifically saying adultery, but he does say, think very hard about this, because if you have a chance somewhere else down the road, if you change your mind and think, man, I wish I wouldn't have sent her away. She wasn't as bad as I thought she was. And so you think, man, I would like to marry her again. Moses says you can't.
But what if a man don't send her away? Like she said that she didn't see, seeing uncleanness in him, or didn't like him for some reason.
That's not the way. It's a patriarchal society, my friend. The woman didn't have a whole lot of choice in the matter. She lived in her father's house until her husband made a deal with daddy, 12 goats and a bottle of wine. And so the marriage was contracted, and so she moved from her dad's house to the man's house, and she lived in his house. And it ain't like today. You don't go before a judge and he say you get to keep the tent and he has to leave. I mean, it was his tent, it was his property, it was all that. So the only option is he sent her away. She didn't stay. He sent her away, packing.
You can't make them stay with you. If they don't want you, I mean, they go down the road. And,
And again, if they do that and they commit adultery, then you got a reason, again, to...
It caused it. She went on her own. You didn't want her to leave, but she went.
Again, that's the uncleanness. And so, that's what we're looking at. But...
What if you're outside the church?
What was that, Paul?
I said, what if you're outside the church and it's got
marriage is not a church thing.
if they sin like that,
It's not a church thing.
and then they get married,
Come in now, but
and then
Between
they
them and
go
God,
and
ain't it?
repent, and they go and repent of that, go to church and repent of that, which they knew was wrong, but they got married anyway, but they didn't go to the church, then they went to church and repented of, went forward, repented of the ways and was baptized. Would they be forgiven of that way?
They can be forgiven, but they can't stay married.
I just wonder, no.
We have to understand marriage is not a church thing. Marriage is a covenant between a man and a woman. And God authorized marriage. And He is the witness and the keeper of the vows. And you have to understand, originally, you didn't even really have a ceremony per se. I know we've got all of our white dresses and all that stuff and marching music, and we go through. But besides Adam and Eve, but in the course of human history, like I said, you want a wife and she's pretty and you want to marry her. You don't ask her if she wants to get married. You go to Daddy and you say, Daddy, I've got 12 good goats. I got 7 donkeys, and I'll give you all of them if you let me have your daughter in marriage. Well, if you agree to that, then there was actually a covenant made where different types of conditions and circumstances, it's almost like a contract was produced. Even in the more traditional Jewish weddings today, they have what's called the ketubah, which is the marital contract. And that contract spells out the rights of the husband and the rights of the wife, and they sign that, agreeing to that. It's a covenant, it's a contract. And so if you don't abide by that, you've broken that covenant. And of course, Jesus said the only reason to break that covenant would be for the cause of adultery. Yeah.
Jacob, when he had worked 7 years for his wife.
Had to work 7 years for the first one, and he got a bum deal. He kind of got cheated in the deal. It wasn't what he bargained for. And then he had to turn around and bargain for the second one. But in all of this, if you just go back and think, what did God intend in the beginning? What did He expect for the husband and the wife to do? And that was to stay together, raise a family, raise their family up to where, again, their sons would enter into a relationship with their wife, and the man would leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and their daughters would leave their mother and father and would cleave to their husbands. And in the process of time, after all the begetting was done, we don't have any more to marry off. And so from that point on, then again, between the husband and the wife, they were there to finish their time together after, of course, the fall. And that was God's original plan. Anything else Anything else is God's leniency that he gave to Moses and them, or that Jesus makes it very clear that except for the cause of fornication or adultery, then it talks about that. And later on, we're told that his disciples came to him after the multitudes had went away, and they were kind of scratching their head like, maybe we misunderstood what you said. So his disciples came to him again, and we're getting back to his disciples rather than just the multitudes or the followers. Could you go over that one more time? Because maybe we missed something, because it seems a little rough around the edges to us. It don't swallow it too well. And so in the home, he says, whosoever shall put away his wife, except for fornication, shall marry another, committeth adultery against her. And he that marrieth her when she's put away, because she doesn't have grounds for the divorce to start with, when she marries another, when she was put away for the wrong reason, causes to commit adultery. And we know that what Paul said in our lesson, we've been studying Galatians 5, that adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of heaven. And so he speaks about that. And his disciples, hearing it again, and they've heard it before, just like Brother Richard read earlier in Matthew 5, and now here, and now he's speaking to them again. His disciples said to him, if the case of the man is so with his wife, if we're understanding what you're saying, and you're saying that the only way to be divorced is because of adultery, it's not a good thing to even marry. I mean, why would anybody want to get married if they're going to mess up their life? Now, Jesus could have said, you're missing the whole point, but he didn't. He knew they understood what he said, and he knew that they understood that if I marry a woman and the only way I can get rid of her is if she commits adultery, and my luck, she would just to spite me, would never commit adultery, would never look at another man all the days of her life. I'm stuck with her forever. That wouldn't be a bright idea then to get married. And Jesus didn't say, you missed the point. He said unto them, not all men can receive this saying, but they to whom it's given. Jesus said, you're more right than you know, but not everybody can abstain from marriage. So, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7, he preferred for at least that time that they remain unmarried, but if they marry, so they've not sinned. Again, there's some who can't marry at all, for there are eunuchs that are so born from their mother's womb, and there are eunuchs which were made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs that made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. And then notice what he says again. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it. Receive what? What they just said. why, Lord, it's better not to get married at all than to get stuck in a marriage we can't get out of. And Jesus says, well, you can't say that of all men. There's some men can't get married anyway. But if a man's smart enough and he knows himself well enough that he may not be able to be faithful in marriage, then maybe it would be expedient for him to stay single.
It's like taking a car or truck and running through a mud hole. No, you're going to get stuck. Why do it?
Just to see if you can find a way out. But anyway, it's not a subject that people easily accept. But Jesus clearly teaches that God had a plan in the beginning. And if you can't follow that plan now, then maybe you ought to think twice about whether or not you really want to get married. If you can't or don't think you can stay with that person for the rest of your life, and if you don't think that person's the kind of person that either would stay with you or you want, why would you marry him anyway? And see, this is where the sin and the problems in the world comes in. People are not instructed about marriage. They haphazardly go out and they make a mess of their lives, not just in marriage, but in many other things. Don't fool yourself that marriage is the only way people mess up who are not in the church. People mess up in so many different ways, and they have to accept the consequences of that. And some, because they've not dealt correctly with the things of marriage, coming into the church, will basically have to make themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. If you want to be in the kingdom, then you done messed up in your previous relationships. And so if you're interested in genuinely serving the Lord, then as Jesus said, some end up having to make themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. Doesn't mean that you have to literally, physically do that, but the abstaining from marriage is something that they will have to do. Just as Paul asked, and as we mentioned, you can be forgiven of anything, but being forgiven and not having to deal with the consequences, that's two different things. If you sin and you get your arm cut off doing something that you shouldn't, you can still be forgiven for what you did that caused you to get your arm cut off. But anybody think you're going to grow your arm back when you come out of the watery grave of baptism? Now, you might have a new one in the resurrection, but I don't think we're going to grow that arm back. You get shot and injured and paralyzed or whatever, robbing a convenience store. Can you be forgiven of that? Yes, you can. But does that mean as soon as you're baptized, you're going to start walking again? No. You still have to deal with the consequences. And it's the same with marriage. Can you be forgiven for betraying the things of marriage? Yes, you can. God will forgive you that. You wouldn't be the first to betray the things of marriage, but it doesn't mean you get to keep the whole situation. I mean, that's, again, if you're living in fornication when you obey the gospel, you can be forgiven of that. But if you're not married, you can't go back and start living together again, as that's still fornication. Baptism doesn't make fornication marriage. So, again, take it for what it's worth. But I believe Jesus is very clear. God had a plan in the beginning. Mankind, because of the hardness of their heart, has perverted the ways of God. But that doesn't necessarily mean that God is always going to bend over backwards to accept everything that we do.
In closing this evening, we wish to thank you again for spending your time in study with us. We hope the lesson has been uplifting and motivational. We encourage you to return again for our next lesson. Until then, may we invite you to visit our website. You will find many study opportunities. Our resource page has links to the Gospel Broadcasting Network, a 24/7 station with many great Christian programs and speakers. In Search of the Lord's Way, with Brother Phil Sanders. We have 2 links for Bibles and downloadable software. If you are looking to really expand your knowledge, perhaps you might like to try World Video Bible School, a college-level learning site free of charge. So, until next time, may God bless and keep you in His care as we walk together in His truth. And remember, as always, the churches of Christ salute you.